Hi, I'm Aaron Johnson.
Hi, I'm Eleni Georgios.
Hi, I'm Joanna Diamond.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about an American legend. When you talk about the American Civil Rights Movement, you probably think of Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Malcolm X. What if I told you there was someone who, 80 years before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus, refused to give up her seat on a train in Memphis, Tennessee? What if I told you that before Malcolm X shocked and radicalized people with black nationalist thought and that movement, there was a woman who shocked the nation and the world by showing what actually occurred in the American South with lynchings? What if I told you that Martin Luther King Jr. running the NAACP never would have happened except for a woman who helped found the NAACP, though she never got the credit, still to this day does not receive the full credit she was due. That woman was Ida B. Wells, and I'll be speaking to you today about this woman's life, her career, and her legacy. She is an overlooked and often forgotten American hero, but in this day and age, in this moment in 2018, her legacy, her bravery and courageous activism in the face of injustice and prejudice is a lesson that we can learn from and apply to this day and age. Ida B. Wells was born a slave in 1862, in July, in fact, July 16th. 6 months after she was born, she was emancipated. A free woman, born into a family of 8. But her life was not one to be of a smooth, happy life. For many of her family and friends, there was no happiness. There was very difficult to find happiness in America after the Civil War, in the Jim Crow era. At the age of 16, she suffered tragedy. Both her parents and 3 of her older siblings died in a yellow fever outbreak. Ida, being the oldest of the family, was forced to go and fake being a teacher to get a salary as a teacher to pay for the schooling and the food and the board for her younger siblings. She was always a family woman, as you can see here. Despite her activism and her desire to live a full, rich, courageous life and career, she always valued family and friends. And in fact, that was where she drew the source of her true power, was standing up for her friends and family when injustice was visited upon them. In the 1880s, she was in Memphis, and her first experience with the Jim Crow era was when she bought a railroad ticket first class to go to Chicago to visit family and was forced to move to the back of the rail car. Ida B. Wells, though she stood just under 5 feet tall, was not one to take any shit from anybody. She refused to move to the back of the rail car and in fact sued the railroad and won in circuit court before having her judgment unfairly, I might add, with the gift of posterity, overturned in the Tennessee Supreme Court. After getting a taste of realizing that standing up to injustice was the only way that she could live her life, she opened a newspaper and was the co-editor and co-owner of the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight. What a name for a paper, am I right? And writing under the pseudonym of Iola, began to document the injustice that she saw around her. This work continued until it reached a breaking point in 1889 when one of her close friends, Tom Moss, was the owner of a black grocery store that was getting some competition from a white grocery store in the area, and a disturbance was started by the white grocery owner and their supporters. The black men were thrown in jail and then were dragged out of their jail cells and lynched. Ida, being as she was a citizen journalist and someone unafraid of taking on established power, did not let the case go. She documented the lynchings and realizing that others outside of Tennessee and the Jim Crow South did not know that lynchings were something that were visited upon black folk who had the temerity to stand up to entrenched white power, she found herself the center of an international scandal as she went around the South and documented lynchings, which at that time were public gatherings, were like a town parade. All the whites came together to watch the lynched black folk hanging from the trees, and without any shame, without any thought that there would be any consequence, until Ida B. Wells came and brought the shame of the world and the spotlight of the world by taking photos, writing the stories, sharing them with the world. That work brought her such acclaim that she was considered the most famous and influential woman in America by the late 1890s. But Ida B. Wells, being the woman she was, did not stop there. She used her platform and her privilege to create more justice for others in other fields. She was a leader of the women's suffragette movement. In fact, married her husband, she did not take his last name, and in fact, he stayed at home and supported the family while she traveled the world and continued her journalism. In the 1890s, despite risking her life and suffering against domestic terrorism, took up other causes, including being a founding member of the NAACP, the organization that would later be run by Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and other civil rights movement, but she was written away from the history of the founding of the NAACP because of her radicalism. They were being more conservative and being not quite okay with a woman being a founding leading light of the movement, pushed her role in history aside to write their own narrative of how this organization was founded. She did not let that stop her and left a legacy of journalism foundations, her newspaper, as well as the National Association of Colored Women, when she died in the 1930s. Her legacy today is undergoing some very well-needed brush-up, and she is becoming more and more recognized as an incredible woman who set the stage for the type of journalism that we value today. We need to look to her example to say, when we are confronted with injustice, confronted with prejudice, to not back down, to not be afraid, but to go boldly into the teeth of it and show it to the world and say, this is not who we are. We can be better than this, even if we have been in the past. And that is a life worth living and an example worth following. I'll leave you with a quote of hers. Ida B. Wells said, "I would rather die fighting than to die like a rat or a dog in a trap." Is there anything more that we need today than that kind of fighting spirit? I say no. And in fact, this week was the anniversary of her birthday, and there was a movement in Chicago to get a statue placed in her adopted hometown. I've had some visual aids here of Ida B. Wells. I'd like to share one more with you. It was a donation I contributed to the Ida B. Wells Monument Foundation. And in fact, on her birthday, the 17th, over $80,000 was raised, and that monument was fully funded, will be installed by the end of 2019. I relied upon the research of many black women, female historians, who were the ones who uncovered and have restored her legacy to full light. A lot of my research was on articles that have been published very recently. She is a figure that is undergoing a current and much needed rehabilitation in the eyes of history, and I think that she is an incredible inspiration and an American hero, and I am proud to talk to you about her today.
Yay!
Yay!
Thank you, Ethan. That was very illuminating.